Once we have this conception of self, we respond to the people and things around us with either attachment or aversion. That's the real danger of the belief of a self. Thus, the rejection of the self is not only the key of the end of sufferings and afflictions, but it is also a key to the entrance of the Great Enlightenment. Quote 3. Buddhist teachings are wonderful dharmas of liberation. Generally speaking, all teachings of the Buddha are aimed at releasing human beings' sufferings and afflictions in this very life. They have a function of helping individuals see the way to make arise the skillful thought, and to release the evil thought. For example, using compassion to release ill will. Using detachment or greed-lessness to release greediness. Using wisdom or non-illusion to release illusion. Using perception to release selfishness. Using impermanence and suffering to release conceit. For lay people who still have duties to do in daily life for themselves and their families, work, religion, and country, the Buddha specifically introduced different means and methods, especially the Buddha's teachings in the advices to lay people. Sri-lanka. Sutra. The Buddha also introduced other methods of cultivation. To abandon 4 wrong deeds of not taking life. Not taking what is not given. Not committing sexual misconduct. Not lying. Not doing what is caused by attachment, ill will, or fear. Not to waste one's substance by the 6 ways of not drinking alcohol. Not haunting the streets at unfitting time. Not attending nonsense affairs. Not gambling. Not keeping bad company. And not staying idle. In addition, lay people should always live in the 6 good relationships of their families and society. Between parents and children, between husband and wife, between teacher and student, among relatives and neighbors, between monks and lay people, between employer and employee, etc. These relationships should be based on human love, loyalty, sincerity, gratitude, mutual acceptance, mutual understanding and mutual respect, because they relate closely to individuals' happiness in the present. Thus, the Buddha's Dharma is called the Dharma of liberation. Besides, Dharmic Shanti is also a wonderful Dharma of liberation. Dharmic Shanti means acceptance of the statement that all things are as they are. Not being subject to the law of birth and death, which prevails only in the phenomenal world created by our wrong discrimination. Patience attained through Dharma to overcome illusion. Also, ability to bear patiently external hardships. Dharma door of patience, Dharma gate of patience, is among the 6 paramitas. The Dharma door of patience is very important. If we cultivate the Dharma door of patience to perfection, we will surely reach an accomplishment. To practice the Dharma door of patience, one must not only be hot-tempered, but one should also endure everything. 4. The Abhidharma was introduced to the Third Council in Vaishali in 386 B.C. The Buddha has passed away, but his sublime teaching still exists in its complete form. Although the Buddha's teachings were not recorded during his time, his disciples preserved them, by committing to memory and transmitted them orally from generation to generation. At the time of the Buddha, literacy was a privilege of the elite in India. And this another indication of the premium placed on democracy within the Buddhist tradition, that literary formulation of the teaching was neglected for so long. Many people were not literate, so word of mouth was the universal medium for preservation and dissemination of the Dharma. 3 months after the Buddha's parinirvana, there were some tendencies to misinterpret, or attempts were being made to pollute his pure teaching. Therefore, his disciples convened councils for gathering Buddha's sutras, or the collection and fixing of the Buddhist canon. In the development of Buddhism, several councils are known. the history of which remains partially obscure. These councils were originally probably local assemblies of individual monastic communities that were later reported by tradition as general councils. In Buddhist history, there were 4 great councils inside of India and some other councils outside of India. The 3 baskets, tripitaka, or the 3 storehouses, or 3 Buddhist canon baskets of Buddhist teachings, which contains the essence of the Buddha's teaching over 45 years. It is estimated to be about 11 times the size of the Bible. The Theravada canon written in Pali and the Mahayana canon written in Sanskrit. Even the Buddha already passed away, but his sublime Dharma still exists. Even though the Master did not leave any written records of his teachings, his great disciples preserved them by committing to memory and transmitting them orally from generation to generation. The Third Council was held at Pataliputra in 386 B.C., sponsored by King Asoka, a celebrated Buddhist layman. There are no records of this council in the Vinaya Pitaka. The reason for the convocation of this council was a disagreement over the nature of an arhat. A monk from Pataliputra, Mahadeva, put forward that an arhat is still subject to temptation and he is not yet free from ignorance. He is still subject to doubts concerning teaching. Also, according to Mahadeva, an arhat can make progress on the path to enlightenment through the help of others. These differing views led to the division of the monks, and the Third Council was convoked. However, the council only confirmed the differences instead of reconciling these differences. The Pali school in Ceylon did not accept this council. They accepted the council convoked by King Asoka in 244 BC. The reason for the convocation of the council in 244 BC was a conflict between monks regarding the entering the order of 2 kinds of monks. 1. Who entered to practice Buddhism. 2. Others who entered to enjoy certain privileges. Abhidharma of Theravada refuted the heretical views and the entire canon was read out. A monk from Pataliputra, Mahadeva, put forward the following position. An arhat is still subject to temptation, that is, he can have nocturnal emissions. He is not yet free from ignorance. In addition, he is still subject to doubts concerning the teaching. Moreover, according to Mahadeva's view, an arhat can make progress on the path to enlightenment through the help of others and, through the utterance of certain sounds, he can further his concentration and thus advance on the path. Differing views on these points led to division of the monks into 2 camps. Those who affirmed these points of Mahadeva's, and who believed themselves to be in the majority, called themselves Mahasanghika or Great Community. Their opponents, represented by the elders, who were distinguished by outstanding wisdom and virtue, called themselves Stavira. With the conversion of King Asoka, the material prosperity of the monasteries grew by leaps and bounds and the monks lived in ease and comfort. The heretics who had lost their income were attracted by these prospects to enter the Buddhist order. They continued, however, to adhere to their old faiths and practices and preached their doctrines instead of the doctrines of the Buddha. This caused extreme distress to Thera Moggaliputta Tissa, who retired to a secluded retreat on Mount Ahoginga and stayed there for 7 years. The number of heretics and false monks became far larger than that of the true believers. The result was that for 7 years no apposita or retreat, pavarana, ceremony was held in any of the monasteries. The community of the faithful monks refused to observe these festivals with the heretics. King Asoka was filled with distress at this failure of the Sangha and sent commands for the observance of the apposita. However, A grievous blunder was committed by the minister who was entrusted with this task. He misunderstood the command and beheaded several monks for their refusal to carry out the king's order. When this sad news reported to Asoka, he was seized with grief and apologized for this misdeed. He then invited Magadhi Tissa to hold the Third Council. Thus, the Third Council was held by the need to establish the purity of the canon, which had been imperiled by the rise of different sects and their rival claims, teachings and practices. Because of the above-mentioned reasons that caused this division, King Asoka organized the Third Council. In the 3rd century B.C., at Pataliputra, the old capital of Ceylon, King Asoka himself assigned 60,000 monks to participate in this council. To obey the order of King Asoka, Tissa thereafter elected 1,000 monks who were well versed in the 3 Pitakas to make a compilation of the true doctrine. The council lasted for 9 months to discuss the different opinion among the bhikksus of different sects. At this council the differences were not confined to the Vinaya, but also connected with the Dharma. This was not a general council, but rather a party meeting. At the end of this council, the president of the council, Moggalipatra Tissa, compiled a book called the Kathavafu refuting the heretical, false views and theories held by some sects. The teaching approved and accepted by this council was known as Theravada. The Abhidharma Pitaka was included at this council. Upavasartha Sila, and Tripitaka, Sutra, Vinaya, and Abhidharma. One of the important results of Thei Council was the dispatch of missionaries to different countries of the world for the propagation of Buddhism. After the Third Council, Asoka's son, Venerable Mahinda, and the king's daughter, Sanghamitta, brought the Tripitaka to Sri Lanka, along with the commentaries that were recited at the Third Council. They were extraordinarily successful in this island. The texts brought to Sri Lanka were preserved until today without losing a page. The texts were written in Pali, which was based on the Magadhi language spoken by the Buddha. There was nothing known as Mahayana at that time. Besides, from the edicts of King Asoka, we know of various Buddhist missions he sent to far-off countries in Asia, Afirca, and Europe. It is to a large extent due to these missionary activities that Buddhism became one of the most important religions of mankind. Between the 1st century B.C. to the 1st century A.D., the two terms mahayna and hinayana appeared in the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra, or the Sutra of the Lotus of Good Law. About the 2nd century A.D., Mahayana became clearly defined. Nagarjuna developed the Mahayana philosophy of sunyata and proved that everything is void in a small text called Majjhimika Karika. About the 4th century, there were Asanga and Vasubandhu who wrote enormous amount of works on Mahayana. After the 1st century A.D., the Mahayanists took a definite stand, and only then the terms of Mahayana and Hinayana were introduced. We must not confuse Hinayana with Theravada because the terms are not synonymous. Theravada Buddhism went to Sri Lanka during the 3rd century B.C., when there was no Mahayana at all. Hinayana sects developed in India and had an existence independent from the form of Buddhism existing in Sri Lanka. 5. Abhidharma or Wonderful Dharmas. 1. An overview and meanings of Abhidharma or Wonderful Dharmas. Higher Dharma, or the analytic doctrine of Buddhist canon or basket of the supreme teaching. Abhidharma is the third of the 3 divisions of the Buddhist canon. The study and investigation of the Buddha Dharma. Abhidharma was translated into Chinese as Great Dharma, or Incomparable Dharma. However, in many later Mahayana works, the term Abhidharma is always referring to Hinayana teachings. As a matter of fact, Abhidharma consists of books of psychological analysis and